Okay, so in this video we're going to build off of one of the previous videos of creating terrain from contour lines and Rhino. In this case we're going to look what happens if you don't have access to contour shape files, you can't find them, maybe you even want a different resolution or intervals of contours. In QGIS you can actually extract your own contours from a digital elevation model for areas that you might not have that information already for. For the most part, these digital elevation models, or DEMs, are pretty prevalent throughout the entire continental US, and I think they're continuously expanding this. They're very high resolution height field images that have a lot of information embedded into them. So we're going to go through that process of how to create your own contours for topography. Again, go through that process of bringing them into Rhino and Grasshopper, and then doing some editing of that surface as well. So the first thing I want to do, again, is kind of go a little bit more in depth with this workflow process with QGIS. It's always good to kind of start off with maybe an aerial just to kind of get your location set. So a good way to do that in QGIS is setting up these XYZ tiles of different map imagery. These are essentially servers that have access to certain types of mapping systems. So if you search for QGIS XYZ tiles Google, you can start to find these URLs to these servers and all sorts of different types of maps. So there's just the standard maps, there's satellite, hybrid, terrain, roads. These are all the different types of versions they have, and depending on the way you search, you can find all sorts of other types of maps as well. So essentially all you have to do is copy these URLs, make sure that you don't include any of that space because it can create some errors. So just go ahead and do Control-C to copy. You can see I've already got several set up, but I'll again kind of show you how to do that. You just right click on this, say new connection, give it a name, so video satellite map. I'll go ahead and paste that URL. You can change the zoom level for it. I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK. So it's created that new one, and I'll just double click on it and it'll bring up your map. So I'm going to now zoom into the Las Vegas area, and you can see that it's a nice high resolution map. Every time you zoom in and out, it kind of refreshes, gets you different resolution quality. But you can see that I can zoom in pretty far with a pretty high resolution, and this is the quality that you can expect to output from the software. So when you can zoom in, obviously it's not going to be perfect or the greatest quality the further you zoom in, right? But it gives you that ability to zoom in quite a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and just find an area that has some interesting topography going on, area that's got some good imagery as well. You'll see in some areas where, like here, there's a distinct edge where the stitching of these images don't exactly match up perfectly, so you have to be aware of that. I mean, there's nothing you can really do aside from editing that in Photoshop, I suppose, but I'm going to do for this demonstration just an area to get a good kind of quality. And this one's cool because I can see that I've got this wash going through. I've got lots of ridges and valleys, so it's a pretty diverse and distinct topography. So let's go ahead and use this area as our focus for this tutorial. So like I said, the next thing we want to do is actually get the topography. And in order to do that, so let's say we don't have any contours for this, or we don't have the correct intervals, there's another link you can go to, which I'll provide all these in the video. It's called the USGS TNM download, and this has a lot of mapping files, specifically shape files, images, all these types of things at various scales and for a lot of different areas. So if I go to my elevation products, I'm going to make sure that I have the 1/3 arcsecond DEM. This is the highest resolution that they currently have. It's seamless. You can find out a little bit more about these by going to this site. But I'm going to have that select, and then I'm also going to choose to have the file format set to IMG or image. Next thing you want to do is zoom into where you want to get information for, and then draw a rectangle for that area. So I know that topography is in this kind of area. These are pretty big images that have a pretty wide range. You can actually see what they are if you click show availability. You can see that you have it right there. So let's just go ahead and say find products. So internet's a little bit slow, so it's taking its time with that. Let's look at the one result. So this is the actual one I want. And you can see if I look at the footprint for this, that it is a very large ranging map. It doesn't mean that it's not going to have good resolution. It still has really great information. You can see that the image itself, even though it appears just to be this black and white height field, it's 322 megabytes. So it's a pretty good substantial file. Like I said, there's a lot of information already embedded into it. So once you find the one you want, you go ahead and click download. I'm not going to do that. I've already got it downloaded. I don't want to have to wait for that to finish. So now I can go back to QGIS. I want to bring in a rastered image. So I go to layer, add raster layer, or Control-Shift-R. We'll go ahead and find that height field that you download. I've got these already in a collection on my computer, and I know it's this one right here. So once you unzip it, it's almost half a gig. So let's go ahead and open it, add, close. Like I said, even at this zoomed in scale, it's still got a lot of detail in it. And you can again see how large this image is. It takes a second to refresh it because of its size as well. But it's of this area, and you can see just when you turn it on and off how it compares with these mountain ranges. The way these work is the white areas are the high points, the black areas are the low points. So I don't really need to have it turned on. I'm really just interested in kind of creating my area. So from these images, this is where you extract contours from. Like I showed you, it's a pretty big file, and I don't really need the contours for the entire image. I just want it for a select area. So I'm going to create a new vector layer or new shapefile layer. I'm going to give this a name by clicking on the save option, and I'm going to call this DEM contours, and I'm going to do 10-foot contours just so it's something manageable. So let's go ahead and hit save. I want to make sure that the geometry type is select to polygon, that the projection is the same as whatever the project is, so in this case this projection. Now I can just go ahead and hit OK. Now in order to add the bounding box for this, I need to edit that layer, go up to Edit, Add Rectangle from Extents. I'm going to pick a fairly decent size area that's, again, got some nice diverse topography. So let's try over this area. Once you've selected that area, you can right-click, hit OK, and here's your glorified bounding box. So I'm going to save that file. Now I can use this to actually clip this image and then run the contours from there. So I don't have to have it turned on either. I can just go up to Raster, Extraction, Clip Raster by Mask Layer. So that's what we just created. So I'm going to use the input file as the net or DMM file. The mask layer, the DM contours, and now I'm just going to go ahead and hit run. So now we can see that that height field image has been cropped to that area, and it readjusts all your black and white values to retain that high point and low points. And so from here I can again run my contours. So just so you can kind of see, I'll keep it actually turned on. So I'm going to do raster extraction contour. And the thing that we want to contour is to make sure that we use this clipped layer, which it's already defaulted to. Again, 10-foot contours will make it pretty manageable. And now you can just go ahead and hit run. And it really takes a short amount of time. We can see, looking at this, how great these contours start to look. And you can see they match up with that height field. There's that distinct wash, these giant ridges, some of this other unique topography and landscape. And again, you can even see how it matches with the satellite image as well. So the other thing to be aware of, let's turn this contour file on, is that because I set them up as 10-foot intervals, if I go to the attribute table, I'll see that my elevations are also set at those 10-foot intervals. So this is the information we're going to use to actually set their Z values in Rhino and Grasshopper. So I've got that all set up. Something that's also good is to actually look at other ways of representing your topography and terrain in Rhino and Grasshopper. So in this case, maybe I want to show that aerial image on top of my 3D terrain in Rhino. So I can do something very similar of cropping out this area to match that bounding box. So I'm going to right-click this aerial image layer, say Export Save As, and I want to save it as a GeoTIFF. I want to make sure that Create VRT is turned off. Find a place to save it. So you can see I've got a couple already saved from previous exercises. So I'll name this Mount Charleston 2. Hit save. Again, make sure that you have the same projection. We want to make sure we change the extent, because right now it's set up to do this entire window. We want it to be that same bounding box that we created earlier. So I can do calculate from that layer. And then we also want to set the resolution. So basically, the lower the value, the higher the resolution. So if I do 1 and 1, we can see we're going to get a 12,000 by almost 13,000 megapixel image. So it's a pretty high resolution. Now I can go ahead and hit OK. It's going to take a second, which is perfect for us to migrate over to Rhino and Grasshopper now. And the workflow for this is going to be, again, very similar to the previous exercise of taking existing contours and creating topography from it. So you'll see that it's a pretty familiar process, but again, I'll go through that as well. So I'm going to use the Edit plugin, import in data viz. I need to find that contour layer, which I actually need to save. So I've got those contours, so let's go ahead and export it, save feature as, again, make sure it's a shape file. We're going to again refer to this as DEM. I'll make sure contours, contour lines, 10 feet. Probably should have used a better naming convention, but oh well. And again, make sure this, in this case, it doesn't use the same one that we've been using, so make sure that you set your CRS or that map projection to the same one you've been using, because that will create some issues. And now you can go ahead and hit OK. So now again, it's literally just a duplicate of that file, but now we've got it saved on our computer. So again, I'm going to bring in that shape file, so I'm going to go primitive, file path, set that file path, let's try to look at these a little bit better. So I've got DM contour lines. So again, wherever you save that, that's where you're gonna look for. Go ahead and open that. We need to bring in a Boolean toggle to actually run these plugins because it's a lot of information. So we want to make sure that we actually activate it. And the features, this is again the attribute table that we saw in QGIS. I know when I was looking at the attribute table for the contours, even the ones that I just saved, there's this column and then there's this column. I'm really interested in the second column, so the elevations. So you'll see in Grasshopper, if I go ahead and turn that to true, so it runs it. It's taking a second for it. Okay, I see that there's the feature, again, the ID of those contours and the elevation. So I'm really only interested in that elevation, which is list item 1. So we need to parse that out. So I'm going to go to sets, list item, and again, I'm looking for list item 1. Sometimes I like to distinguish them of panels for things that I know I don't want to change versus using a number slider for things that I may want to change at some point. So just kind of a good workflow of kind of organizing your files. So this one goes into get value feature. This also needs to have that Boolean toggle connected. I like to just kind of have it connecting both. And you'll see I've got 874 polylines and 874 elevation values. So let's go ahead and zoom out to wherever it is. So hitting that zoom extent will go to your contours. So you can see again, it's all perfectly flat, but that's not what we want. We want these to be at their all respective elevations. So I'm going to go ahead and use the move component. I want to move them in the Z value by, again, their respective elevation. So I can turn this guy off, and now I can see I've got a nice elevated contour, which is pretty cool. I can, again, you can see the elevation for the wash, the mountain ranges, and again, these are all set to 10-foot intervals. So if you want to show more detail, you can always run smaller intervals. Just remember that that's just going to create more information, larger file sizes, so gauge on what your computer can handle. So there's one more thing I want to create, and this is going to help us with some other things, is that I actually want to create a bounding box for this to use as a reference to match those images from. So I'm just going to use the flattened contour, so I'll turn this back on. So this piece right here to create a bounding box. So I can double click bound, or double click and type bounding box. I want to go ahead and flatten this so it just puts all the contours together. And then I also want to right click and say union box, so it just creates one box for everything. You'll see that if I don't have a union, it'll essentially create a bounding box for each one of those contours. So we just want to use that whole collection of contours. And then from here, I can pull this out because it is reading as a box. This will just create a planar surface. So I've got that. I can now create some points from these contours and create our mesh that way. So you could use the control polygon to essentially find all the points of those curves. Might be a little bit heavy for this, so I'm just going to actually give a designated distance, and I'm going to, again, flatten this, give it something like every 100 feet, and we can kind of gauge it from there if we can use more points or less points. So it seemed to handle that pretty quickly. Again, you can see that the less points you use, the more features you'll start to lose. So let's just go ahead and see and compare this. So if I were to use these, the points that are creating these curves, you'll see just how much more accurate it'll be. So I'm going to flatten that, drag it into there, and it actually worked pretty quickly. It was actually quicker than that. So now we can see that pretty much those points are capturing all those curves and all those segments. So that's really going to create a very high resolution 3D terrain. You can see that when I zoom out, it almost seems like it's so dense that the points are creating curves themselves. So I'll turn that off, and again, I'm going to flatten these points to be one pool of data, go to mesh, and use the Delaney mesh. And hopefully this doesn't take too long to create our mesh. Alright, it wasn't too bad. If it was going to get really long, I would just clip that part out of the video. So again, you can see just how high resolution of a terrain that this creates. You can see all the different unique ridges and washes and valleys. It's pretty cool. So now what I want to do is bake this into Rhino to its own layer. Can turn it off now so you can see, and I'll turn this to rendered. So again, you just see how detailed this clay model is. Then I'm going to also bake this onto layer 2. So I've now got this kind of bounding box to set as a reference for some other things that I'm going to show you now. So, like I said, you might not want to have just a clay terrain model. Maybe you actually want to use either this aerial image, so you can see this one's finished up now. So this is the aerial that it just extracted. And again, it's a very high resolution image. So we can actually use this now to project onto that terrain. Or you might want to use this height field as another way. We've already got this stuff saved, so we can apply it that way. So now, again, let's go to Rhino. And in this step, you will see that there might be some issues with my file, but I'll show you how to kind of troubleshoot around it. For some of you, it might work out right away. Sometimes you'll have to do a minor troubleshoot to actually get the render display to work correctly. And again, it's not that big of a deal. It's just a lot of information that it's trying to process, and it can't always get it the first time. So I'm going to select that image. I'm going to apply a material by object. And here I'll go down to texture, use color. I'm going to go to the folder where I save that, and this again, I'll go to my extra large icons and find the file that I just saved. And that should be the second one. Right here, so Mount Charleston 2. I'm going to open this. And it's going to take a second to read it. And to no surprise for me, it comes in as this kind of matted color of that image. This is obviously not the aerial that we just imported. So this is where I was saying again, there's a couple things to this. The first thing we need to do is actually remap the texture. And it should be as simple as just applying a planar mapping. So this is why we have this bounding box to help us reference. So I knew that the image came in, or it looks, and see this one, they're making sure model space. And I'm just going to go from this corner to this corner. And then I'm just going to hit enter. And sometimes that works right away where it matches your aerial up perfectly. Other times you actually have to go ahead and save this file and go ahead should work. So if there's another step we can do if it doesn't work either. Sometimes it's just too large of an aerial and you have to save it as a JPEG in Photoshop, so I'll just start that up just in case. I'll go ahead and save this file. Mount Charleston terrain. So I'll go ahead and save this. It's going to take a second because it is a large file. I'm just going to create a new file. And now I'm just going to open that file I just created. Like I said, usually that's enough to reset that image. And usually once that happens, every other image will work. So you can see now I did the right process. It just, again, had trouble displaying it the first time. But now my aerial image is matched up perfectly. You can see just how well it does using that retexture mapping, where the kind of ridge where this roadway is going through, this other wash, all those match up quite beautifully. And what's cool is you can actually take that same aerial image, edit it in Photoshop. So let's just go ahead and do that, and this will actually help us create a smaller file size too. So Mount Charleston 2, let's go ahead and, because you can see it's 645 megs, so it's a big file. Because it's in that TIFF format, or a GeoTIFF actually. So let's not crop it. So this is where you can apply all sorts of different edits to it. Maybe you want to add a desaturated layer, kind of maybe make it gray tone. You can even add the lightness, and maybe in this case we can always kind of erase some of these things, but so maybe I use a large soft brush. For those of you unfamiliar with layer masking in Photoshop, there will be some videos on that on my page as well. So I can just use a soft 20% brush to kind of go over some of these areas, make sure that the black is set for the white, and I can just start to kind of go over some of these areas to bring back the color and the actual clarity of it all. But you can create something pretty unique to the space. So I'm going to kind of use this valley as the light point, and then have it slowly kind of fade to black as it gets further away. And that's for a rendering style in Rhino. So you can even go even more kind of over the top with this by maybe adding some color to it as well. You can again apply another hue and saturation, and you can start to fiddle with this to create something kind of unique. So maybe you want to go for something more, a little more vibrant. So you can amp up that saturation for it. And so from here I can just go ahead and do File, Save As. I'm going to do this as a JPEG. Call it PP for post-processed. And let's just kind of make that a little more vibrant. So I'm going to resave it. But I'm going to amp up the vibrance for it, so it's a little more kind of, has a little more pop to it. I can even play with my curves to give it a little better contrast. So the darks are really dark, and then the lights are much lighter. I don't know if this is the right way to do it. I can try one more thing as the exposure. Hopefully that doesn't ruin the blacks, but rather kind of create something almost kind of radiating out from it. That's pretty cool. Alright, so let's try saving this one now. So I'm just going to override that file. Yep, go ahead and replace it. And again, we haven't messed with any of the proportions of this image, so even though it's a smaller file size, it has all these new edits to it. It'll still match up nicely with our image. So it looks like it's still taking its time saving it. It could be wrong, so let's just give it a shot. So again, I'm going to go to my material, change it this way. Unfortunately, whenever you apply a texture, you get an additional window, so it doesn't just go directly to the file location. You have to click one more button for that. Now it seems since I have so many things operating, it's starting to take its time. Let's see how that Photoshop file. So that's done. I guess I can save this and then close it that way. I'll give my computer a little bit of a break. Here we go. So that seemed like it helped. Oops, let's just cancel that. Okay, so now, again, so this is where that file name is. Come on. All right. So let's relink that new one I just created. So that post-process, so it's a little smaller. It's only 32 megs now. And let's go ahead and hit OK. Black. All right, so there, now we got our new image. I'm gonna go ahead and hide this. And this is just one of my own kind of favorite things to do with this, is that now that I've kind of got this unique topography, portions favorite, settings, change the color to black, and now you can almost have it look as if it's starting to kind of take this glow image and slowly fade to this black. And you can obviously do some more in Photoshop to kind of even fade that part so it really kind of seems like it vanishes into the distance. And don't forget, you can obviously take the contours you created and bake those onto its own layer too, right? And now if you want, you can bring that even into Photoshop and Illustrator and start editing the contours to match it as well. So this might be interesting. What if I do black contours? So again, kind of that black contours fade in, but I can see where they are on this. There's again a lot of different cool things you can start to do with this terrain and how you display it. So that'll be it for this video. Again, we'll continue to kind of build off of some of these things in later videos, but now you know the workflow of